Stanford University.
Remember, if you've missed more than 2 of these lectures, let Pao and I know so we can figure out what you can do to get credit for this course. Next week we have Susan Weich. Susan is a postdoc researcher at Virginia Tech and is going to be talking about some of her work for designing ICTs for developing regions. And this week we have Yvonne Rogers. Yvonne's a professor of HCI at Open University and directs the Pervasive Interaction Lab. And take it away.
Thank you very much. The last time I gave a seminar here was 1996, when multimedia was the big thing. So the world of technology and HCI has moved on considerably since then. And what I'm going to do today is to talk about, I think, an important development that's been happening in the last couple of years as we move out of the lab and into the wild, and what this means. And it follows in a tradition of what I'm calling a history of turns. And what I mean by a turn is a change of research questions that are asked, almost, if you like, a call for arms, where someone is trying to legitimize an area of research that previously was marginalized. So perhaps the first turn that happened in HCI was the turn to the social. And this came about largely through people like Lucy Suchman and Graham Button, sociologists and anthropologists, who opposed the dominant paradigm, which was cognitive science at the time, and argued that we needed to consider social aspects. And with this brought different methods and different lenses by which to look at research questions. Since then, we've had a turn to the home, and this is against much of the research which was done in the workplace, and thinking very much about how you might take technology into the home, and what does that mean, what kinds of methods you might use. And work that was done at Interval more recently Intel Aware Home, and also Bill Gaver, his work on cultural probes, introduced a new way of thinking about human-computer interaction. We've also had a turn to design, which was a reaction against usability engineering and new schools of design, notably Ivrea, but also more recently the D School here, where design becomes central to what it is that we're doing, and that brings with it new methods and techniques. There's also been a turn to emotion or affective computing, where we consider other aspects of the user rather than their cognitive or social. And we can largely thank Don Norman for introducing his book on emotional design, but there have been others too who have brought this to the forefront of human-computer interaction. And there's been a turn to fun. I think I was talking to someone today who said they only do research that is not work. And this can entail looking at leisure and fun. And there's been books on funology, and it's okay to study things that aren't to do with work. So in this context of a history of turns, what we're seeing now is this turn to the wild. And what we mean by this is that we're doing things in the real world. And by things, I refer to prototyping, to designing, to observing people, and to evaluating the things that have been created, or simply what people do in their everyday lives. And so we're seeing this trend from doing research in the lab, where we had fully equipped usability labs, where we studied people, to about 10 years ago, this idea of the living lab, whereby you created a living space. It might be a home or it might be a classroom inside the lab, in order to be able to try and create what it was like to be in those spaces, but with all of the technology you could use to evaluate and to sense what people were doing. These were very expensive, and there's still some of them are around, but what's happened of recent is a move to actually go right out there into the living and use mobile technologies to sense and measure what people are doing. So there's been this trend from the lab to the living. And largely it's been made possible by developments in ubiquitous computing technologies, mobile sensors, Bluetooth, and that's allowed us to push technology outside and see how people use it in these different contexts. So why go wild? Why do this? I think I've already said, but it can, going out of the confines of the lab, my belief is that it can make a big difference to what we as a community can do in terms of designing and developing technologies for society. What I'm going to do is just talk about 4 approaches in my own research where I'm trying to make a big difference by going wild and in some cases going native. And the first one is, what I'm thinking about is that we can create things that are truly novel, that are truly innovative. By doing this, we can also invade real worlds, and I'll talk about a project to do with that, and thinking about how we might change people's behaviour and habits. And lastly, it allows us to explore more philosophical, existentialist questions of what it means to be human. But just to say it's not easy. I think it's a lot easier when you're inside a lab because you have much more control over what it is that you're building and studying. And what you ask people to do with the technology that you've developed. It's a lot more expensive when you go outside and building these prototypes and working out how to get them to work out there. It can be more risky, it involves lots more people, and it can be more time consuming and uncertain as to what you might find. And so I was just talking over lunch about one of my projects and was asked, well, what happens if it doesn't work? How do you know it might not work? What are you going to do next? And I think that's part of the risk that you have to take if you're going out into the wild. And all of this is about giving up control. It's very much you put it out there and see what happens, whereas in the lab you instruct your participants or your subjects to do certain things, and you want to test whether you designed your interface so it supports a particular behaviour, so they may perform efficiently or effectively. So to begin with, I'm going to talk about one of my earlier projects, which was to try and create something novel. And it was part of what was called the Equator Project. This was research between 8 universities in the UK, where our remit was to explore the physical and the digital. And this is at the time when mobile and ubiquitous technologies were just starting to be, come out and be experimented with. And what we tried to do was to create a novel form of playing. Up until then, there was lots of, as I said, development in multimedia, develop games for kids that would appear on the PC and virtual environments. We wanted to try and create a game that would engage the children in the physical environment where they had to do things in various spaces and to explore this relationship between the physical and the digital. And what we created was a game called The Hunting of the Snark, where we developed a range of activities where the children had to do something with the physical that had an effect on the digital. And the game essentially was an adventure game where they had to find out about an elusive character. The Snark, as you know, is a poem by Lewis Carroll, and it only ever appears in glimpses, never in its entirety. And they had to discover in these different spaces more about this character, creature, what its likes and dislikes were. And in order to design this, we were inspired by what we're calling two research aesthetics. And the first one was technology inspiration. We looked at all the technology, the RFID tags, sensors that were around, and we did experiments with them in order to inspire what we were going to build. So it wasn't technology-led, but it was using these new technologies to get us to think about, well, how do we design these spaces? And we also used what we're calling Ludic engineering, and by this we're promoting learning through novel, playful visions of technology. And much learning is done through being playful, and so we ourselves want to be playful in how we use the technology. And so what the children had to do, as I said, was go into these spaces and find out more. The first space involved them discovering hidden tokens that were invisible, and they used a PDA to try and find them. And when they found one, it was transformed into a physical token. And these tokens were food items that they could feed the snark with at a well. And the snark would come up to the top of the water and would make a response depending on what it was fed. And so the children collected a number of items of food. And you can see them feeding at the well here. So the child on the right is holding something which is a special camera, and we asked him to take pictures of the snark as it appeared, and the other one was feeding it down that chute with the plastic food. And what happens when they place this plastic food in, the digital snark appeared on the surface of the water, and if it liked the food, it could be a fried egg or a cake or a piece of meat, it would show either like or disgust. And we use a very simple animation to show disgust. And from that would appear at the water's surface, and from that they were able to come up with a picture of the snark. We also gave them flying jackets so they could fly with the snark, and the snark would appear in different shapes. And they could walk with it in a cave, and using various sensing mats, it would detect their movement, and again it would sing with them. And so they were able to build up a picture and collect various images and sounds, and then afterwards we got them to talk about it and reflect on that experience. And I think from that early project, what we found was that exploring the unexpected, and this is, that if you put a physical food item into a chute, this digital response would happen, and that the actual feeding of an animal is it's a very familiar action, but combining that with the unexpected triggered the children to question their very understanding of what it meant to move between these two worlds. And also, I think for us, without our own playful excursion with the technology, we wouldn't have got to be nearly as creative as we were in that. And I think since that early foray into using ubiquitous computing technologies in this sort of playful learning, there have been many others who've tried to move out of designing things to appear on a screen, but where children can move through augmented or embedded environments. So the second approach to going wild is this idea of invading a real world, or more commonly what's called as deployment or technology intervention. And what I want to tell you with this one is how our assumptions were so wrong when we based them on the lab studies that we'd carried out previously. And it's the technology we were interested in was using a shared surface, a tabletop. And what we were trying to do was to think about how we could facilitate collaboration. And so this project took place last year. It's going to be presented at CHI by my researcher Paul Marshall. And what we did was to look at what happens in tourist information centres. And this one was in Cambridge, UK. And we started off by carrying out an ethnographic study to see what happens when people come into this particular space. And typically what we found was that people will go there to be inspired, to find out what they want to do for that day or that afternoon. But as they come in as a family group or as a group of friends or a group of students, that they will disperse and go foraging for whatever they can find. So they will find leaflets, they will look at posters, but they don't tend to stay as a group. Some of them might, or one of them might wait in line to talk to someone at the counter to get a map, and then they will eventually all come back together, and one of them will suggest to the other that this is what we're going to do. We're going to visit the colleges in Cambridge. We also, when we looked at what happens at the counter, and we found that the conversations tend to be suboptimal, that the person behind the counter might talk to one of the members of the group, and that particularly if there's children that they can't actually see above the counter. So you've not got a group kind of collaboration or consensus going on as to what they'd like to do. So having done this ethnographic study, we were thinking, well, how can we provide an application that would encourage more discussion or planning between the group as to what they want to do for that day or afternoon. And so we came up with some assumptions before we designed our application, which is that there is a need for group planning, because clearly there wasn't much of that going on, and that might help everyone feel happy that they've all had a say in what they're going to do that afternoon. And also that what a typical group is, which was between 2 and 5 people, and it could be a family or it could be a group of friends. And that we'd carried out a number of lab studies before to look at how you can facilitate group participation, and from that get an idea of how you might design the interface. So our solution here was to design a really simple planning tool, and that it would be very simple to use, that people wouldn't have to be trained because they're just coming in, and it would be aesthetic and attractive for people to be drawn to. So the application we developed, we had a golden rule, which is that it shouldn't be no one should spend more than 5 minutes using this. And part of that was because the Tourist Information Centre wanted there to be throughput. They didn't want a group to be spending too much time at the table. They wanted them to come through. And so essentially the design we have here is, to begin with, there are a set of cards using a carousel metaphor, where you can select a card and move it on the tabletop, and it will give you information about a site. And at the moment you can just see images, say, of the colleges or of the shopping or the churches and so on. And each individual at the side of the table will select a card, and then they can choose 3, and they'll place them in these slots here, and that's the stage 1. It's an individual stage. The second one is, when they've all done that, is to press a button, and all of their choices of where they want to go appear at the top here, and you can see who's chosen them and how long if you went on all of those, how long it would take. And then they would appear on the map, and they would give them further descriptions, and they could print it off. And the idea here was we deliberately put this constraint in so that this signaled to them that this is where we want you to work together as a group. We want you to all come around one side of the table and discuss the choices that have been made. So we took a lot of time to design this to be robust, because it was going in there into the store, and that it to be simple enough, and we involved a professional interaction designer to help us to do that. We then did a 2-month in the wild study where we just sat in the corner and just watched people come to it and use it. What we found was that the people who worked in the Tourist Information Centre loved it. They thought it was a great success, and we got lots of coverage in the news about how this was going to change the way in which people plan their trips. But the amount of use varied from 2 seconds to 10 minutes. And what I think was most surprising for us was that we discovered that how wrong we were about our assumptions, particularly about how groups form and what they do at the tabletop. And our assumptions were wrong because the way people behave in the wild is very different than from in the lab. And I want to just address this by three questions. First of all, I don't know how many of you have seen the Jeff Hahn video of him using his multi-touch surface, but it's magical, and I'll show you that in a minute. And we are asking, do the general public touch like Jeff Hahn? And how do groups interact around the table, and do they collaborate more than if it wasn't there? So just to remind you of what Jeff Hahn showed us back in 2006 what you can do. I don't know about you, but when I first saw that, I was bowled over at just the amazing way in which he fluidly interacted with that surface. But what we found was the public are certainly not like Jeff Han. And what you'll see here is that people want to try it, but when it doesn't work as they hope, and they'll give it another go and we'll walk off. So here's another example where they're bringing their existing mental model of using a touch surface or using a mouse. And we found that happened quite a lot, that people would come up, try, get frustrated, or, particularly because it's in a public space, and then move on. Now, this might be because they've never used a multi-touch surface before, and some of those who've had smartphones perhaps had a different repertoire of how you might touch this. But it certainly is an issue or a problem to consider when putting these types of things in public, which are to be used as a walk-up, is that you can't tell people how to use them. You can't say this is how you do it. We did provide a video to show, and we actually had little things on the screen which said push here, touch here. The other thing we found was that families don't arrive together in the way in which we anticipated. We thought they might all congregate, but one of the family member might join and then might use it and might shout over to another. Or in this case, one of the elder brother is using it and the younger brother doesn't know when he can join in. So he's very cagey about joining in. The other thing we found is that we had designed it for groups who knew each other to use together, but there were some occasions when strangers would come to the table and start using it as if it was a shared resource. And this had particular problems for the stage 2, where we designed it where they would all come around together and discuss their choices. And you can see here the boy on the right is looking at the various cards and deciding which ones to choose. And the girl with the pink jacket looks over and thinks, I'd like to have a go too, and comes up to the table, doesn't say hello, but just starts to use it as if it's something that can be used by anyone. The problem is they're at different stages, and he's finished before she has. So at the end he gives up and just like gives her a dirty look. But they don't actually communicate, and they don't realise that this was designed to be used as a group planning tool. So there are lots of other findings from that which we're going to present at CHI, but I think for us what it shows is that you have this idea that this is a shared tabletop. It's going to be used by groups, but groups rarely come to the table at the same time. And the way in which when we've run lab studies, we've got groups of 4 to come and say, right, you come here and this is what we'd like you to do. And it's the same in classrooms. When you bring 4 children to the table, they all start at the same time. But here it was rare that anyone started at the same time. And so this has got us rethinking the concept of what we mean by a multi-user interface. In that in public there's quite different ways in which people or groups will approach and use the tabletop. And so what we're thinking of here is rather than a sort of a fine dining model where you all come to the table, you're brought there and you sit down, it's more like a buffet style table where you might one of you might go up and graze and select something and another might go up. And that presents a very different set of requirements or constraints as to how you might think this tabletop is going to be used in public. And should we be designing it as a shared resource for collaboration or more for a free-for-all? We should say that there are also some serendipitous findings from this, that despite that where the 2 strangers didn't talk, we did have situations where strangers did talk to each other and ended up going together on a tour of Cambridge. And I think there were 2 students from Holland and 2 students from Germany that came together as a consequence of that. So it can have unexpected effects. So the third approach I want to describe about going into the wild is one that's become very popular in the last 2 or 3 years, which is designing mobile and Ubicomp technologies to help people to improve their health and their well-being, or energy consumption. And the idea here is that you provide people with information and displays that they can act upon to change their behaviour. And the behaviour I want to talk about is a project where we were interested in encouraging people at the point of decision making to take the stairs rather than the elevator. There are a number of approaches that have been tried to try and get people to change their behaviours. This is one, there are these signs all in downtown LA last summer that I noticed on lampposts, and it's very much emotive and in your face. And I think it might be something that BJ Fogg calls hot triggers. But this one in particular plays on people's weaknesses and guilt. There's another one here is using mirrors. So the mirror on the left makes the person look very fat if they're going to take the elevator, and very thin if they're going to take the stairs. So again, it's a very emotive approach. And our approach, following along on the lines of the hunting of the snark, is to be more playful and subtle as to how we might suggest to people to change their behaviour. And so what we did was quite a different tact, which was to design aesthetic ambient displays and to try and influence rather than to try and persuade or coerce people. And this follows on from the notion of how we might try and nudge people's behaviour. I don't know if you're familiar with this work that's been done in Switzerland by Pierre Dillenberg and his group, but this is called the React table, which as you can see there are a group sitting around it, and there are some LEDs in the middle, and they represent the amount that each person has talked during that meeting. So as you can see, the girl on the right has done most of the talking. She's got the purple LEDs, and the one on the left there has done the least. And the idea here is that they can look at this, and implicitly it suggests that perhaps one of them might like to talk less and the other more. Whether this works or not is another matter, but it's kind of trying to nudge people. The example on the right is called the green cloud, and this was developed by Helen Evans and Heikko Hansson in Helsinki, and it draws a glowing cloud using a laser representing the smoke coming out of a power plant, and it changes its size depending on the amount of power that's being used in a city. So if it's really large, that suggests that there's a large amount of energy is being used, and that you might like to reflect on that. Again, the idea here is to give information that might nudge you. And I'm going to, we've made an iTunes video about this. I'm going to let that explain to you how our particular ambient displays worked and were designed. The idea behind the Clouds project is an investigation into ambient information displays and how we can use these to change people's behaviour. And in particular, we're interested in changing people's behaviour at the point of decision making.
Clouds is an Open University research project funded by the EPSRC.
You can see that a large typical display has been set up that's giving different feeds of information depending upon what they choose to put on it. But also in this space, right up in this area, will be our large ambient display. Our large ambient display is going to also be sort of pumping a constant feed of information, but the piece of information is going to be much smaller. Our ambient display is going to simply be telling you, are people using the stairs or the elevator? And the more that people use the elevators, the higher the orange cloud of spheres rises, and the more people that are using the stairs, the higher the gray cloud of spheres is rising. And so walking in the building, someone can quickly glance and have this single piece of information given to them whether they wanted it or not. As people enter in through the Jenny Lee building, the first thing that they're going to notice is right up in this airspace, there's going to be this large collection of spheres hanging. This is the first point of decision that they make, whether they're going to either go into the central atrium or either head to the upper floors or into the other offices. As they veer in this direction, the floor sensors will detect that they're going this way, and that's when the LEDs will begin to light up along the carpet. The pattern of motion will be acting as a sort of subtle lure, suggesting if you're going to the upper floors, perhaps you should take the stairs. As they walk in this direction towards the stairwell, they'll sort of get a bit of a reward in the sense that the LEDs will begin to spark up faster and faster and faster. But if they step off the path in this direction towards the elevator, the entire series of LEDs will change to sort of a red glowing field. As that pulse of red sort of suggests that the carpet is a bit upset that you didn't take its suggestion to take the stairs, and it's a bit disappointed that you're taking the elevator. So it is a series of strategically placed pressure pads throughout the building. We have these pressure pads at the beginning of every stairwell and at the entrance to every elevator. And this is simply taking a counting of the number of footsteps across this threshold. So as somebody goes up the stairs, we add 1. As someone goes in the elevator, we add 1. This is a visualization showing what we've been getting from our pressure pads throughout the building. What we're using this for is to compare the different people's usage of the stairs versus the lifts, and also as a way to try to get an early idea of what our structure is going to look like.
Hello, I'm Susanna Hertwig. I am an interaction designer, and I was asked to come up with a concept for the project. The project was about how information could play a role, or how technology could play a role inside architecture to make people do certain things. And of course, starting with a brief and then talking to the people involved in the project, like sharing ideas. So the second step was, identifying these 2 spots in which the installations should take place, and also then really thinking what is feasible. Like in the entrance, the lights on the floor was inspired by these carpet tiles that were already there, so why not just use these tiles? And but the atrium is so high, and there's all that space from the ceiling that is not used. And the most important bit was, of course, that these are functioning pieces, that they communicate what they should be communicating. So one part of this matrix of spheres was supposed to represent the lift, one was supposed to represent the stairs. And the easiest way to do that was like choosing 2 colors, two different colors, keeping it on this very functional level, but trying to add a little more, let's say, of an aesthetic, poetic level, to not just make it informative, but also very pleasing to engage with.
So one of the things we did was we did some low fidelity prototyping. specifically with this, to try to explain what it would look like to have a cloud made of particles that would rise above the other and then throughout the day change shape so that one came either close or above or below to give different pieces of information. This is the second model. I think most of the other model was eaten the day it was made. So there's a sweet spot that we're looking for. There's information that's too aggressive. You can't help but see it. And then there's information that's too subtle. You never notice it's there. So we're really looking for the best way to design information that is useful but non-distracting and non-intrusive.
Okay, so just to recap, what we've done in that project was create two displays. One which was intended to lure people towards the stairs, and the other is an aggregate or a display showing how many people have taken the stairs versus the elevator at different times. So the big question is, how effective was this approach? And so again, we carried an in the wild study. We got a baseline measure of, there were about 250 people in the building, and we measured the number of people taking the stairs and the elevator for about 6 months. And that was during the time we were developing the prototype, but that enabled us to get a good sense. Then when one weekend we put the displays into the building. We didn't want to tell people about this because we wanted them to come across them and to reflect and to think themselves, or to ignore them, or to whether they noticed them or not. So we observed people as they came in the following week and saw whether they looked at the clouds and also whether they looked at the twinkly lights. We then, after a few weeks, carried out an online survey, and we asked people, all the people in the building and all the people that visited it, to answer a few questions. And the prize to incentivize people was an iPod, and I think we got about 50% response rate, which was very good. And we also logged people's behavior. As you saw with the pressure pads, we were able to measure how many people took the stairs and the elevator. So what happened? In terms of the twinkly lights, we found that most people really enjoyed playing with them. Some of them, most people smiled when they came across them, and some actually danced with them. And they also understood that it was somehow trying to direct them towards something. And some examples here of comments included things like, they mean, look here, there's a door here to the stairway. They're like a landing strip guiding you to the stairwell. They made me say, ooh, pretty, and stars dropping from the sky. So there was a general positive reaction to those. The clouds, however, hardly anyone knew what they meant. And some people thought that we have two departments, the computing department and education and technology. Some people thought it was the productivity rate for the two departments that was being represented. But what it did, and this was unexpected, was that it provoked a lot of discussion amongst people. This is an open plan building, and people were asking each other what they thought it meant. Was this yet another, art installation, and so on and so forth? But it created a buzz in the building, and that, I think, is an important aspect of, if you're going to change that whole community's behaviour, how they react and their reception to it. So here's where the interesting thing starts to come in terms of our findings. After a few weeks, we carried out this online survey, and we asked them a number of questions. And one of them was, do you use the stairs more? And one of the responses here was yes and no. I always took the stairs and continue to do so, but I'm now feeling really excited about taking the stairs, expecting the thing to move at any moment. But I also worry that one day I might spend the whole day running up and down the stairs just to see how they would affect the display. We asked people, have you changed how you use the building? And 93% of people said they hadn't changed their behaviour at all. And this was rather disappointing to us. But then when we actually looked at the logged usage, we found quite different finding. If you can see here, what we've got in this graph is the stair to elevator ratios. So if it's a stair elevator ratio of 1, that indicates equal choice. And if it's a value less than 1, that indicates that more people are taking the elevators than the stairs. And if it's greater, that means that the stair usage is more than the elevator usage. And obviously it peaks and troughs over the different days. The green line shows the average before the installation, and the red shows the average after. So there was a significant difference in terms of more people taking the stairs than the elevator. And yet people had said to us that they hadn't changed their behaviour. So what we've got there is a kind of conflicting finding between actual behaviour and perceived behaviour. And the trouble with going in the wild is we can't be sure what's causing this. We can only speculate as to why that might be. And our speculation is that that these ambient displays, particularly the clouds, and may be working at a subconscious level, and they may be working during those weak moments, perhaps after lunch. You're coming back and you're feeling a little tired, and you think, oh, I'll just take the elevator. But if you see the twinkly lights, that might trigger you to think, oh, I better take the stairs. But it's done at a subconscious level. And so you're not aware that you may have changed your behaviour. You may think you're just doing exactly the same thing. The problem for, more generally, when we're doing these in the wild studies, is that if we're collecting mixed, if we're using mixed methods and collecting a variety of different types of data, how do we resolve these differences that can arise from the different data points? And I don't have the answer to that, but I just think this is one of the problems when we go into the wild, is you can't say with certain what is causing that behaviour. Okay, so my final project I want to describe about why and what the benefits of going into the wild is a little bit more, as I said, existential, in the sense that I'm really interested in what it means to be human and how we might use technologies to answer those questions. And one of the projects that I've been involved in has been working with philosophers. In particular, you may know of Andy Clark. And we got some funding to look at how we can use ubiquitous technology to extend people's senses. And in particular, what we provided with Andy was a wider repertoire of thinking tools by which to question what our sense of self and what it means, this notion of embodiment. And so one idea was to give him an eye in the back of his head so that he could have an extra sense of what's going on behind him, but also to have sensory substitution. And this is an area of research that's been going on for some time now, where you have a webcam on your head, and that information is translated to vibrations that various actuators on your stomach or other part of your body, and that you start to see through feeling this vibration on your stomach, and you lose that sense of the vibration, but you start perceiving in the ways as if you were seeing. So we're exploring how we could use these different technologies. Another one was to have a ring as another eye, so you could go like that. And coming out of this early exploratory research, we got to meet with a theatre company who are a blind theatre company run by blind actors, and they wanted to develop a project called The Question. And this, what they were interested in was, could we build a device that would enable sighted and blind people to navigate in the dark? Importantly, following on from our earlier research, to alter people's senses and their sense of being. And to ask the question, what does it mean to explore the dark without our sight, and how it might heighten your sense of perception. So this video, I think it's going to play, will explain just a bit of the background to it.
Experiment in immersive theatre, devised, written and directed by Maria Oshodi, Artistic Director of Extant. Maria created The Question in collaboration with engineers, artists and academics during the project's research and development period between October 2009 and July 2010. Funded by the Technology Strategy Board, this R&D combined Extant, the Battersea Arts Centre and the Computing Department of the Open University.
I decided that the best format would be to create islands of touch and audio in the dark. The audience would navigate to these zones using the haptic device to guide them.
Haptic technology employs tactile feedback to communicate with the user through their sense of touch by applying forces, vibrations, or motions to the user. Adam Spears is the designing engineer of the haptic device and led the technical team of David McGoran and Paul O'Dowd to create the haptic lotus.
It's doing something which no one can experience without the technology. So we're not saying, oh, this is what it's like to be blind, because it's not. You know, here's a sense you can only have with the device in your hand.
So we were very much in working in the dark here, being led by the artistic director there as to what she wanted. What was our involvement was to design this haptic device to help explore the space and also to evaluate the experience. And here's a description of the device, which was very much like a flower that opens and closes in your hand.
Throughout the active exploration in the dark, the audience is guided by a specially designed haptic device called the haptic lotus. The lotus uses robotics and infrared sensors to change its form, and by doing so guides the audience through the installation and into each zone. The lotus sits in the palm of your hand, its petals opening as you approach zones of interest and closing as you move further away. Inside the installation, it is so dark that even the most sensitive eyes could not see their hands in front of their faces. So CCTV cameras were used to keep an eye on the audience for their own safety. Using the haptic device, the audience is guided into 4 different zones, and in each they can hear a soundscape through their headphones, but only when they're inside the zone. Simultaneously, each zone offers objects of varying size, shape, and textures, which are designed to be explored by touch.
So we weren't sure again whether this device would, what it would do for people, both sighted and visually impaired. Would it help them navigate through this dark, immersive theatrical experience? And we designed it to be particularly vague in terms of what information it gave, and also to be aesthetic again. So we didn't want it to say, walk 5 feet straight ahead and then to the left and you'll find something interesting. It was more just based on this notion of opening and closing depending on whether you were getting warmer or colder away from something that was of interest. And we carried out, there was a week of performances, and our role was to evaluate how different audiences experienced what their experience of this was and how it changed their perception. So again, I'll just play the video here.
Research and development culminated in 5 days of performances at the Battersea Arts Centre in June 2010.
I wanted to redirect the dramatic action away from the conventional mediator of spectacle on stage and instead relocate the action of the drama within the bodily experience of each audience member. I wanted to do this by getting the audience to navigate through a dark environment that contained audio design and tactile set that they could explore, where each individual could discover the narrative in their own ways. Another intention was to develop part of Extant's ongoing research into creating a more authentic experience of theatre for visually impaired people.
This is the question, which is the question, why is the question?
As I made my way around the object, I was kind of creating an image, it was like taking a pencil and trying to draw a sketch from life, but it was in my head.
You can't be a passive audience member in this situation.
It's interesting from a tactile point of view as well as auditory, yeah. I really enjoyed it.
I didn't feel that I had to stay in a certain place for longer than I wanted to, so the freedom I had to move around was brilliant. That's what I really liked.
I mean, when you're blind, you don't often get opportunities to wander freely in a space physically and to play with things that you encounter.
It's like an old fanfare going to the haunted house type thing.
I really particularly loved the way in which the lotus stayed with you as a sort of almost like a little friend that that accompany you on your journey, and it was a beautiful metaphor of knowledge and consciousness and awareness. If you're reading the wonderful Philip Pullman novels, I suppose it's the equivalent of a demon.
So that was perhaps one of the most in the wild projects I've been involved in, where I really was out of my comfort zone as to where we were heading with this and what we were going to do with our haptic device. And in our evaluation, we found that people didn't use it, particularly the blind people, to help them navigate, but it gave them a sense of reassurance. It also got them to think about more, it increased their awareness, if you like, of how they do move. We take it for granted that when we move, but when you're in the pitch black, you can't see anything. That's the case anyway for blind people. But what do you use instead? What else do you rely upon? And what we found was that this was like a reassurance, but also they felt more intensely what they heard through the headphones, and also what they felt. And then if they touched someone, there was like quite a different reaction. So I want to finish off now by just coming with some conclusions. I've given you a very diverse set of projects I've been involved in, which have been exploring what it means to go in the wild, and some of the design principles and tactics that we've used in this exploration. And part of it has been to, as I said, create novel experiences and to push the technology in very different ways to the traditional paradigm. Part of it has been to show that some of the findings that we have got from doing lab studies do not apply when you put the technologies into the wild, and that was particularly the case for group collaboration around the tabletop. And then using technologies in exploratory ways to sort of question what it means in terms of our senses and our understanding of the world. So I just want to conclude by saying I think designing in the wild is unpredictable. It can be potentially dangerous in terms of you don't know where you're going. It can backfire, but luckily we've been able to, I think, come up with creative applications that have, in some ways, been able to make a difference to people's lives. And I think that, to me, is one of the most rewarding things in doing this type of research. And it also enables us, not only to dream, and I think it's important any of us who are doing research to be able to dream about the way in which we can design technology, but that it can have real value to society. And I just want to finish with a quote from David Kelly, who I think has always inspired me. And what he said back in '96 was that the designer has a dream that goes beyond what exists, rather than fixing what exists. And I think if we replace the designer to be, I don't consider myself to be a designer, but a researcher, and a research has a dream that goes beyond what exists when you're going into the wild, rather than fixing what exists, which has traditionally been what HCI and usability engineering has been about. So I think I want to end on that note, and thank you very much for being a good audience.
Since we ended by unpredictability, and your stair problem is actually one I often run into, I simply tell especially technical people that stairs have predictable latency, and that always convinces them. I'm not sure about the less than technical people it would be that easy, but you get much a higher rating for your stairs.
Right.
I think by telling them that it's very quick. They don't argue with you.
Yes, you can have low-tech solutions.
That's what people like the elevators, so just slow down the elevators a little bit and you get more stair users.
Well, another solution is to put a piece of paper on saying out of order.
Oh, yeah. Famous stories about that.
But the thing is, we don't want to discriminate against people who genuinely cannot use the stairs.
Leave it for them.
Yes.
Question converging into the logistical, imagining that there are perhaps a couple of phases to the investigation. One is the design of what's called integration. Then there's the research phase. And then there might be an mission. Or any idea of the cost of the issues? It would be an indication that going into
I think that so much depends on the nature of the project as to what the costs are. I mean, some of these have, the stairs one was like a year-long project, because in order to have those clouds be put up there as an installation, we had to go through all sorts of hoops, including health and safety, and we had all sorts of people come in. We had to do rigorous testing to make sure that they wouldn't drop before we actually installed them. So that was quite expensive, whereas the twinkly lights took us a couple of weekends to get them wired up. For the first project that took with the hunting of the snark, there was about 20 of us involved in designing that. In terms of whether that would be operationalized, I mean, you're probably talking to the wrong person here, because I'm very much involved in the design and the research and the evaluation, but not to the next phase. But I take your point, and it's like, is it, how much is it going to cost us to do all of that before we decide whether we want to take it further?
So, on your several projects, and all of them are very interesting. I kept thinking that one of the major hurdles here is adoption of these new systems, and I wonder if you've gained any insights on how you can increase the adoption of systems in the wild versus, because that's one thing that you cannot do in a lab study. We just assume that things are adopted when you go into a lab study. I'm just curious.
Well, I can tell you the story about the stairs, is that one very sunny weekend, they were held on a fishing line. It was the strongest fishing line we could get. So the reason for that is that we wanted them to appear like clouds, and so they would be invisible from what they were hanging. But the sun, because it's this open plan, came in and directly onto one of those fishing lines. And when we came in on the Monday morning, one of the balls was on the floor. And apparently, if you get the sun on the fishing line for so long, it can cause that to break. I don't know if any of you are fishing amongst you here. And so we had to immediately take down the rest of them. We couldn't have the risk of them. And so, but when and then we switched off the twinkly lights, and people were complaining and say we want them back, and they became very much attached with those, and even now they're asking for us to put them back up, and so we have now used polystyrene balls, and we're going rather than the fiberglass. So there's evidence that people can get very attached, and whether or not the behaviour still will have changed, we'll be able to tell you in 2 or 3 months' time, because we've done. So in terms of, there's an example of a sort of an adoption in the sense that people became attached and they wanted to keep it. They were very proud of it, so whenever there were any visitors, they'd say, come and have a look at our twinkly lights. You see the clouds up there, and whether that's an indication of, it might be adopted in other buildings or.
I'm getting more curious as to the first stage of this adoption. Even how hot these were, what did they do specific to make them like the system and make them get used to the system? In that phase of the adoption process, was there anything that helped and anything that
maybe I can go to the Tourist Information Centre one. In the first week, we were frenetically tweaking the interface because people weren't doing what we thought they should do. So we'd add a video or put a finger pointing saying doing this. And in the end, we just said no, stop. There's no matter how much tweaking we can do, there's always going to be someone who uses it differently. So getting people to like it, I don't know quite how. When you're not there to tell them what it is. And we deliberately, we stood in the corner, and it's very tempting to go over and tell someone and point out to them, this is what you can do with it. But if it's going to exist and be adopted as a standalone kiosk type technology, you've got to kind of resist going over to show them what a grateful thing it is. And often when you're in a lab, that's what happens. People, will tell you, will instruct you, and those instructions, those demand characteristics, can be so important as to how people will like or take to a particular technology. So I think you're up against that.
how you evaluate how they it might be a lot more clear cut. Like they finished this task in X seconds and they were successful. But how does that change from a project like the display to a project like the Lotus one?
Well, for the tabletop one, we, as I said, sat in the corner and did. For the first few weeks, we couldn't video because we hadn't got permission. So we just took notes of you know, how many people came, how long they spent at it, whether they did the whole interaction and printed off the map. We also were interested in whether people would actually pay for this service. Because I don't know about here, but many of the tourist information centres in the UK now have to make their money by charging for maps. So they charge 50p, which is $1. And because they're not getting money from other revenue sources in the way they used to. And so we wanted to see whether they would be prepared to, this was this nice customized map that they got, which showed them exactly the places they wanted. They would be prepared to pay the equivalent or even more. So we put a box there, an honesty box to see what would happen. And some people actually did put in a couple of pounds and so it is possible to show that, that people are prepared to pay for that, and that would be, I think, a very good index of its success. Then we did some video analysis, looking at the interactions, and that's where we saw the problems that were, that people found it really hard, and that's the sort of thing you might identify in a usability lab. But we didn't see any of that when we did our studies in the lab. So I think what we were showing here from these in the wild studies are many more kinds of problems, usability problems, than you might get that you would find in the usability lab itself. So in fact, you can actually find out more than you can in the lab. But you won't get the nice, neat measures. And that's what I was saying, is that sometimes you find something that conflicts with the other, and you're not sure, you can't say with certainty, 0.05% that this is what's caused that. You just have to speculate.
I want to share with you a concern that I have. I'm trying to the snark experience. A concern that I have about designing for kids, designing experience for kids. What I'm worried about is that we have an aim in our mind, like to differentiate between likes and dislikes, as you showed, and maybe the experience or the thing that we want to extract from that experience is not the whole experience. For example, if you feed a real animal, she doesn't want to eat. There are complexities that shows the whole. So I want to ask you, what do you think about it when you design technology for kids?
I mean, this is a game, and the children knew that. They were suspending their disbelief. They were 10, 11-year-olds. And they got completely engaged in it. And so I don't see any problem there with the way in which we designed that particular game. There have been the Tamagotchi games of where I don't know if you remember those, but you have a mobile virtual pet that you have to feed, and if you don't feed it, it will die. And there's a moral question there, is that a good thing to be encouraging children to think about their pets dying like this? And Pokemon has also developed a mobile application to help kids to exercise more, again using a virtual pet. I think this time that the latest version, the pet doesn't die if they don't exercise. It just it sulks or something. I'm not sure what your objection or your concern is to bringing in these familiar activities like feeding pets and in this context.
I'm just referring to the thing that we have in mind that we want to show them. But if we will read the real experience, it will be more real, and they will grasp the complication of the situation. and the thing that will be in the mind will be more of the whole experience and simplification. I'm asking what do you think about it? How to build?
I don't know. I think we'll talk about that more offline. I think for us, we were very much exploring, as I said, those two aesthetics about playful learning and about us being playful with the technology. And we thought this, kind of adventure game is a genre that children are very familiar with, but not in that context. And all I can say is some of the kids who played that 10 years on, they come back to us and say, one of the things I remember most was the hunting of the snark game.
So I was wondering about stair taking versus elevator, essentially behavior change intervention. I was wondering if you had any hypotheses about why people didn't register the behavior change. The fact that they were taking stairs more than the elevator. And I had a follow-up question to that, is did you think about how to make the intervention more conscious? Like, did you think about how alternative designs to bring attention to the fact that they were changing their behavior?
No, I think that could be the next step, is to think about, do different displays raise people's awareness or consciousness differently? And I think it's only through doing this study that we became aware of how, how much people were aware of the different displays in terms of it affecting their behaviour. So I think that's the next step. And I really don't know the answer to that, and whether if you're more conscious of it, that might, you may change your behaviour more or less. But again, it will be, there's the interplay of what the behaviour is. If it really doesn't, of no consequence, like washing your hands or tidying up after yourselves, things that some people tend to be lazy about or forgetful about. If you're raising their consciousness, they may be less forgetful. So I think that is where it might work. But that's something for you to do.
I'm wondering, with a lot of these behavior changing technologies, when you ask people, like for instance with your stair example, did you take the stairs more? They said no, but the results or the data was much different. I was wondering, was it maybe a possibility that people aren't willing to say that this technology has changed my behavior because they feel, oh, maybe I'm being manipulated by the technology. I don't want to show that the technology has changed my behavior in some way, because I want to be in control of the technology, not the technology being in control of my behavior.
That could be a possible reason as well, as them just simply not being aware that they had taken the stairs when they normally take the elevator at a particular point. I mean, we must also bear in mind that most people did take the stairs. There's only 2 floors in that building, and as you saw from that quote, it made someone even more excited about taking the stairs. But there is that margin where you can change people's behaviour more.
I'm curious about iteration in the wild, in fact. So I guess just to continue with the stairs. You were just bringing up the idea that, what if you played with the different lights and whatnot, but there was an interesting thing that you were also getting into with the ball levels, people kind of getting into a discussion about what it actually meant. And so it gets into this interesting question of how long do you need to let one iteration go before you can move on to the next one? And how might that screw it up if you kind of have already built a certain storyline or a narrative that someone they see certain green arrows and that's pointing them to the stairs, but then maybe you change them to orange or something, and that will change the narrative. And so I'm just wondering how, maybe almost more of a contamination effect of previous iterations having an impact on the future iteration, and how that might, how you kind of think about that when you're kind of designing in the wild kind of studies.
We haven't got to that stage, but I think that's a really important point, because we are about to put the more safe clouds back up in a few weeks' time. And will people think, oh no, the clouds have come back, or will they think, what will they think they represent the same thing? And we did have an idea that each week or each month we would ask someone to come up with a behaviour they'd like to be represented by the clouds. So it could be productivity, it could be number of people who are in the building, because one of the problems with open plan is people don't want to work there. And there are all sorts of things that the people in the building might like to use this for, because it is fairly abstract representation. And so that's something that we're playing with. And then people will say, I wonder what it is this week or this month that's being represented. And again, we were discussing over lunch how accumulation or aggregate data is fascinating to people. I never knew that I drank 10 cups of coffee on Monday and Tuesday, but only 4 on Wednesday and Thursday. And so you could play on that, and it could sort of have a different flavour each month, but still keep its level of interest.
So, I think this is a great example of design research. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of design in HCI and in doing research for theoretical insights. So it's not just it's sort of the dichotomy of doing lab studies where you can identify cause and effect and sort of build theory that way, and ethnography where you're not tampering with the real world, you're just kind of going in and observing what's currently happening. Whereas doing this is you're deliberately introducing something new and observing how it affects the people in the space. What does it mean to do? Are there sort of theoretical goals that you have from doing this, and what do you see as the role of design in research?
There aren't, in the particular projects I've described, theoretical. It wasn't driven by theoretical questions as such, except in the eSense project, where we're very interested in whether, if you provided philosophers with a repertoire of new thinking tools, would that change the way, or would that encourage them to think about philosophical questions differently? It's still a question of whether that actually happened, but that was the intention behind it. In terms of having new insights into behavioural change, I think what it's done is it's triggered lots of questions that you might conceivably take those back into the lab or to do another in the wild study about subconscious. Are people, the very question at the back there, do they change their behaviour more or less depending on whether they're more aware or less aware of the technology intervention? So I think what these studies can do, these design and research studies, is suggest theoretical questions that can be probed further. In terms of the tabletop study, it got us to rethink a conceptual model that has been very much part of CSCW, this notion of multi-user interface. What do we mean by that? Single group display, when it's been designed for in the lab, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense now for us when we're using it in these spaces. So what else might we come up with? What's the conceptual model that's appropriate for designing those types of technologies? So I think it can suggest a range of new research questions to do with theory and to do with conceptual models that can be probed further.
So we're actually out of time. I want to thank Yvonne, and she'll be here if you want to ask further questions.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.